1 month after the historic truth session, the stellar council chamber looked very different. The central platform, once dominated by the Bright One's crystalline forms, now hosted a rotating council of representatives from various species. Reed sat in Earth's newly assigned permanent seat, watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. The changes had been swift and dramatic. The motion to establish the Free Development Act is now open for voting, announced the current chair, a builder whose leaves rustled gently as they spoke. This act will ensure no species can be declared protected without their explicit consent and comprehensive review by the full council. The voting lights flickered across the chamber, overwhelming approval. Reed's datapad chimed with updates about the former protected worlds. Already, hundreds of species were emerging from isolation, eager to join the galactic community as equals. Representative Reed called out a water thinker, their liquid form rippling. Earth's faster-than-light drive technology has been approved for sharing with Level 3 civilizations. Your engineers can begin the knowledge transfer immediately. Reed nodded his thanks. The new technology sharing protocols were working well. Species were learning from each other, growing together rather than competing. The Bright Ones themselves had been relegated to standard member status. Their crystalline forms now sat in the outer rings, their once brilliant lights dimmed. Some had accepted the changes with grace, even offering their considerable knowledge to help repair the damage they had caused. Others had retreated to their homeworld, unable to adapt to their loss of power. Next item, the Builder Chair announced. The proposal for the Galactic Scientific Exchange Program. Reed smiled as representatives from 30 different species presented their joint proposal. Species that had once been forbidden to interact were now planning collaborative research projects. The exchange of ideas and culture was flourishing. After the session, Hill approached Reed in the corridor. The ancient rock walker's surface had a fresh sparkle to it. "Did you ever imagine it would change this much?" Hill asked. Reed watched as representatives from various species chatted freely in the hallway. "Not this quickly. But I hoped it would change." "Your truth session did more than expose the Bright Ones," Hill said. "It reminded us all of what the Council was meant to be, what we can be when we work together." They walked to the observation deck, where Earth was visible as a bright blue dot among the stars. Ships of various designs moved through space. Trade was flowing freely now, unrestricted by artificial barriers. The Bright Ones were right about one thing, Reed mused. Humanity does develop quickly. But now that's seen as an asset, not a threat. Indeed, Hill's rocky features shifted into a smile. 3 other species have already adopted your educational methods. And your art. The wing gliders are absolutely fascinated by human music. Reed's datapad chimed again. Another request for cultural exchange. Earth was becoming known not just for its technological achievements, but for its ideas about freedom and cooperation. The station's day cycle was ending, creating a beautiful light show through the crystal walls. Representatives of various species gathered to watch, sharing stories and dreams for the future. "You know," Hill said quietly, "in all my centuries on the Council, I never thought I'd see this. Species learning from each other, helping each other grow. This is what we were meant to be." Reed watched a group of young representatives, some from formerly protected worlds, eagerly discussing their plans for joint colonies and research stations. "It just took one person willing to speak the truth," Hill added. "No," Reed corrected gently. "It took all of us being forced to hear it." The truth had indeed set them free. The galaxy was changing, growing, evolving. And humanity, instead of being locked away in a cosmic zoo, was right in the middle of it all. As the artificial night fell over the station, Reed smiled at the stars. Sometimes, the greatest courage wasn't in fighting battles or making grand speeches. Sometimes it was simply in standing up and demanding that the truth be heard. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. The massive space station hung like a crystalline snowflake against the backdrop of unfamiliar stars. James Reed stood at the viewport of his small diplomatic vessel, adjusting his plain black tie for the 100th time. After 6 months of faster-than-light travel, humanity's first diplomat to the Stellar Council had finally arrived. Station control to Earth vessel. A melodic voice echoed through the comm system. You are cleared for docking at Bay 47C. Please follow the guide lights. Reed watched as blue lights flickered to life along their approach vector. His pilot, Tom, guided their ship with practiced ease, despite this being his first time docking with alien technology. The entire crew of 5 humans maintained professional calm, but Reed could see the tension in their shoulders. The docking bay was enormous, easily holding ships of various sizes and configurations. Some looked like abstract art pieces, others resembled sea creatures from Earth's oceans, and a few were simply geometric shapes that hurt the eyes if observed too long. As their airlock sealed against the stations, Reed took a deep breath. Remember, he said to his small team, we represent all of humanity. Whatever happens in there, stay calm and diplomatic. The airlock cycled, and Reed led his team into the station. The reception committee waiting for them made him pause mid-step. A group of crystalline beings stood at the forefront, the famous Bright Ones, who held the most power in the council. Their transparent bodies refracted light in complex patterns, and their movements created symphony-like chimes in the air. Behind them stood representatives from at least 20 other species. Reed recognized some from the briefing packets. The towering plant-like builders, the graceful gas-filled floaters, and the insectoid hive mind workers. What caught his attention wasn't their alien appearance, but their expressions, or what he could interpret as expressions. The Bright One's crystal faces showed nothing but contempt. Welcome, Earth representative, the tallest Bright One chimed, each word creating a cascade of musical notes that somehow felt mocking. We trust your primitive vessel managed the journey without too much difficulty. Reed kept his face neutral, though he felt his team bristle behind him. Our vessel performed admirably, thank you. We're honored to be the first humans to attend the Stellar Council. Yes, about that. Another Bright One stepped forward, its facets throwing rainbow patterns across the deck. There seems to have been some confusion. Earth hasn't been approved for full council representation. You're here merely as observers. Reed's diplomatic training kicked in. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Our invitation clearly stated. Your invitation was sent in error, the first Bright One interrupted, its chimes sharp and discordant. Humanity is far too young a species to merit council membership, perhaps in a few thousand years, if you survive that long. The other aliens shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. Reed noticed several representatives exchanging meaningful glances, but their silence spoke volumes about the Bright One's influence. I see, Reed said quietly. And who made this decision? The Council's executive committee, of course. The Bright One's crystal structure vibrated with what could only be smugness, of which I am the current chair. Reed nodded slowly, his mind already working through the implications. He'd studied enough of the Council's structure to know this wasn't normal procedure, but challenging it now would only make things worse. Then we graciously accept observer status, he said, bowing slightly. For now. The Bright One's chimes faltered for just a moment, clearly expecting more resistance. You will be shown to the observers' quarters. The next general session begins in 3 planetary rotations. As they were led away by a nervous-looking hive mind worker, Reed caught snippets of conversation from the dispersing aliens. Most seemed relieved the confrontation hadn't escalated, but a few watched the humans with what appeared to be sympathy. Walking through the soaring corridors of the station, Reed maintained his diplomatic smile. Inside, however, his mind was already piecing together the puzzle. The Bright One's hostility wasn't just about humanity. It was too immediate, too practiced. There was something bigger going on here, and he intended to find out what it was. Little did the Stellar Council know, they had just given humanity's representative exactly what he needed, a reason to look closer. Reed spent his first day in the observer's quarters studying. The room was comfortable enough. though clearly designed with minimal consideration for human needs. The walls shifted colors constantly, which he learned was a standard feature meant to comfort the various species that called the station home. His datapad hummed as he scrolled through public council records. Something about the Bright One's reaction bothered him deeply. Their dismissal had been too quick, too rehearsed. A soft chime interrupted his research. The door's sensor indicated a visitor, one of the gas-filled floaters he'd seen earlier. These beings existed as intelligent clouds of gas contained within transparent shells. "Enter," Reed called out, standing to greet his visitor. The floater drifted in, its gaseous form swirling with shades of green and blue. "Representative Reed," it spoke through a translation device. "I am Representative Mark." The simple name surprised Reed until he realized it was probably chosen for easier communication with humans. "What brings you here, Representative Mark?" The floater's gases churned anxiously. "What happened at your reception? It was not right. But it was not unexpected." Reed leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "In the past 50 cycles, 17 emerging species have petitioned to join the Council. All were denied." Mark's gases turned a deep purple. But worse than denial, they were declared protected primitive worlds. "Protected?" Reed frowned. "That sounds positive." "It is not." Mark drifted closer, voice lowering. "When a world is declared protected, it is cut off. No trade, no cultural exchange, no technology sharing. They become living museums, studied from orbit by Council scientists. Their development is carefully managed." Reed felt his blood run cold. "Living museums? You mean?" "Zoos," Mark finished. "Beautiful planet-sized zoos. The Bright Ones claim it's for protection, to prevent cultural contamination. But the truth," the floater's gases swirled faster. "The truth is they fear competition." A quiet knock interrupted them. Reed opened the door to find a builder, one of the plant-like species. Its bark-like skin was patterned with subtle warning signs that Reed had studied in cynobiology briefings. "May I join this conversation?" the builder asked, ducking to enter the room. "I am Representative Oak." Another simplified name. Mark's gases showed recognition patterns. Oak's people were almost declared protected 30 cycles ago. They fought it. "At great cost," Oak grumbled. "The Bright Ones never forgave us for refusing their protection. They limit our trade routes, block our colony applications, but at least we are free." Reed took notes as they talked. A pattern emerged. The Bright Ones had been systematically suppressing emerging civilizations for centuries. Species that showed too much promise or developed too quickly were isolated, for their own good. "Why are you telling me this?" Reed asked finally. Mark's gases formed complex patterns. "Because Earth is next. The Bright Ones fear you. Your species went from primitive radio to faster-than-light travel in less than 200 years. That terrifies them. They will propose Earth's protected status at the next general session," Oak added. "Once it's proposed, it usually passes. The Bright Ones have too many allies, too many favors to call in." Reed sat back, processing this information. "How long do we have?" 3 days until the general session," Mark replied. "After that, if the vote passes, Earth will be quarantined within a month. There must be something in the Council laws," Reed muttered, reaching for his datapad. "Some way to fight this." Oak's leaves rustled. "Be careful, Representative Reed. The Bright Ones don't respond well to defiance. Those who oppose them tend to have accidents." "We've said too much already," Mark added, drifting toward the door. "But watch the older Council members. Some remember a time before the Bright Ones held so much power. They might help, if asked correctly." After they left, Reed stared at his datapad, mind racing. Humanity hadn't come this far to be turned into an exhibit. There had to be a way to fight back, something in the Council's ancient laws that even the Bright Ones couldn't ignore. He just had to find it. And fast. Reed barely slept that night. The station's artificial day-night cycle shifted through its phases, But he remained at his desk, digging deeper into council records. His eyes burned from staring at the datapad, but he couldn't stop. The next morning, he decided to observe the council in session, even if only from the observer's gallery. The chamber was enormous, a vast amphitheater with thousands of seats arranged in concentric circles. The bright ones occupied the central platform, their crystalline bodies creating a dazzling light show. From his elevated position, Reed noticed something odd. Every time a smaller species representative spoke, they first glanced at the bright ones. Not for permission, for safety. He started counting these glances, documenting which species seemed most afraid. Fascinating patterns, aren't they? A gravelly voice spoke beside him. Reed turned to find one of the eldest council members, a rock walker whose species lived for thousands of years. Its stone-like body was weathered with age. Very, Reed replied carefully. I'm particularly interested in the voting patterns. The rock walker's rocky features shifted into what might have been a smile. I'm Hill, it said. I've sat on this council for 700 cycles. Would you like to see something interesting? Hill led Reed to a lesser-used section of the station's archives. Here, physical records were kept. Actual paper-like materials and crystal data storage from centuries past. The air smelled old, if space stations could have such a thing. Look at these trade agreements, Hill said, pulling out several ancient documents. From before the Bright Ones gained control of the Commerce Committee. Reed studied the files. His eyes widened as he saw the numbers. These trade volumes, they're 10 times higher than current levels. Now look at these. Hill produced more records, technology sharing agreements, scientific cooperation pacts, all from the same period. The evidence was staggering. Under the Bright One's leadership, interstellar trade had plummeted. Scientific cooperation had ground to a halt, and the number of protected worlds had skyrocketed. But why? Reed asked. What do they gain? Hill's rocky surface crackled, their version of a sigh. Control. The Bright Ones fear change. They believe they should guide the galaxy's development. Slowly, very slowly. Reed continued digging through the archives, finding more damning evidence. Hidden trade restrictions, blocked development programs, mysterious accidents befalling species that grew too quickly. They're going to propose making Earth a protected world, Reed said quietly. Yes, Hill shifted, ancient stone grinding. But you might have one advantage they don't expect. What's that? You're human. Hill's rocky features formed what might have been a grin. The Bright Ones have been in power so long, they've forgotten what it's like to face someone who has nothing to lose. Reed spent the rest of the day gathering evidence. He found records of other species that had been declared protected, thriving civilizations reduced to scientific curiosities. He documented the Bright Ones' gradual takeover of key council positions. Most importantly, he found proof of their interference in developing world's affairs. As he worked, more representatives quietly approached him. A wing glider showed him records of her people's suppression. A water thinker provided data on blocked colonial applications. Each piece added to the growing picture of corruption and control. The station's day cycle was ending when Reed finally looked up from his work. His datapad was full of evidence, but evidence alone wouldn't be enough. The Bright Ones had too much power, too much influence. He needed something more, something they couldn't ignore or override. As he walked back to his quarters, Reed passed a group of Bright Ones in the corridor. Their crystalline bodies chimed with quiet conversation, but they fell silent as he passed. Their contempt was palpable. Reed maintained his diplomatic smile, but his mind was racing. He had the evidence. Now he needed a way to force them to face it. Something in the Council's ancient laws, perhaps. Something they couldn't dismiss or deny. He just hoped he could find it before the general session began. In the dimly lit archives, Reed found himself drawn to the oldest section. Here, the original Council charter documents were kept, preserved in quantum stasis fields. His fingers traced the edge of an ancient scroll-like device as Hill, the rock walker, supervised his research. "These are the founding laws," Hill explained. "Written before my species even joined the council. Few members ever study them anymore." Reed carefully activated the scroll's reading mechanism. The text shimmered to life, displaying laws and procedures from the council's earliest days. Hours passed as he read, making notes, searching for anything that could help Earth. Then he saw it. "The Open Truth Session," he whispered, leaning closer to the ancient text. "What is this?" Hill's rocky surface crackled with excitement. "Ah, the oldest and most powerful of council procedures. It hasn't been invoked in, perhaps, 1,000 cycles. According to the text, any representative could call for an open truth session. Once invoked, all present in the council chamber would be subjected to a psychic truth field. No lies could be spoken. No deception could stand." "The equipment still exists," Hill said, watching Reed carefully. "The truth field generators are built into the chamber itself. They've never been removed because they're part of the original station architecture." Reed's heart raced as he read the details. "But this is perfect, if I can force them to face the truth." "Be careful," Hill warned. "The truth field affects everyone in the chamber, including you. Every thought, every word must be absolutely true, or the field will know." Reed spent the next several hours studying the exact procedure. The words that must be spoken, the ancient gestures that must be made. One mistake, and the bright ones would shut him down before the field could activate. He practiced the archaic phrases until his tongue ached. Hill watched, correcting his pronunciation, showing him the precise movements required. "Why are you helping me?" Reed asked during a break. Hill was quiet for a moment. "I remember when the council was different, when we helped young species grow, instead of caging them. The bright ones have ruled too long. They've forgotten the council's true purpose." Late that night, Reed's team gathered in his quarters. He shared his plan with them, knowing he needed their support. "It's risky," Tom said, rubbing his chin. If it fails, Earth becomes a zoo exhibit." Reed replied, "I'd rather try and fail than do nothing." They spent hours discussing the details. Timing would be crucial. The truth field would affect everyone in the chamber, hundreds of representatives from across the galaxy. The chaos could be unprecedented. "There's something else you should know," Hill said, joining their meeting. "Once the field activates, it cannot be shut down until the session ends. The bright ones will be forced to face every question, answer with absolute truth." Reed nodded, his determination growing. "Then we need to make every question count." They worked through the night, preparing. Reed memorized his evidence, practiced his accusations. Each word had to be perfect, each claim absolutely true. The field would accept nothing less. As the station's night cycle neared its end, Reed stood at his viewport, watching the stars. Tomorrow was the general session. Tomorrow, the bright ones would propose Earth's protected status. And tomorrow, if everything went right, they would face the truth they'd been hiding for centuries. His data pad chimed. More messages from concerned representatives. Word had spread quietly through the station. Many knew something was coming, though few knew exactly what. Reed took a deep breath, reviewing the ancient words one more time. The phrases felt heavy on his tongue, weighted with centuries of power and tradition. He would have one chance to speak them correctly. One chance to change everything. As he finally lay down to rest, Reed smiled slightly. Tomorrow would either save Earth or doom it. But at least they would face their fate standing tall, not caged like animals in a cosmic zoo. The bright ones had no idea what was coming. The council chamber hummed with activity as representatives filled their seats. Reed sat in the observers section, outwardly calm despite his racing heart. His evidence was ready, his words prepared. He watched as the last members took their places. The bright ones entered last, their crystalline bodies creating a symphony of light and sound. They took their positions on the central platform, radiating authority and confidence. "This general session is now open," the lead Bright One chimed. "Our first order of business concerns the developing world known as Earth." Reed tensed. This was it. After careful consideration, the Bright One continued. "The Executive Committee proposes that Earth be designated a protected primitive world, effective immediately." Murmurs filled the chamber. Some representatives looked uncomfortable, others nodded in agreement. Reed stood slowly, his voice clear and strong. "Before this proposal is considered, I invoke the right of open truth session." The chamber fell silent. The Bright One's crystalline forms flickered with surprise, then alarm. "That procedure is outdated," the lead Bright One said quickly. "It has no place in modern." "The right of open truth session is encoded in the founding charter," Reed continued, carefully making the ancient gestures Hill had taught him. "It cannot be denied." The older council members were sitting straighter now, their attention focused. The Bright Ones conferred hurriedly among themselves. "You don't understand what you're doing," another Bright One chimed sharply. "This session should be, I, James Reed, representative of Earth, call upon the truth." Reed's voice rang out with the ancient words, "Let all present be bound by its power. Let no lie be spoken, no deception stand." A deep hum filled the chamber. Ancient machinery, dormant for centuries, began to wake. Light pulsed through patterns in the walls that most had thought were merely decorative. "Stop this!" The lead Bright One's chimes had become discordant. "Guards!" But the station's security forces stood still. They knew the old laws. Once initiated, the truth session could not be stopped. The humming grew louder. A subtle field of energy filled the chamber, touching every mind present. Reed felt it like a cool breeze across his thoughts. "The truth field is active," he announced, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Now let's discuss why the Bright Ones are so eager to isolate Earth." "This is unnecessary," the lead Bright One tried to say, but the field shimmered. The crystalline being's form flickered in distress. We only wish to protect." The field shimmered again. The Bright One couldn't complete the lie. "Tell us the real reason," Reed commanded. "Why do you want to declare Earth protected?" The lead Bright One fought against the field, but the truth came out. "Because they're developing too fast. Their progress threatens our control, like all the others we've contained." Gasps filled the chamber. Many representatives had suspected this, but hearing it confirmed was different. "And the other protected worlds?" Reed pressed. "Tell us about them." The Bright One's chimes were strained. "We keep them isolated, dependent. We control their development, their resources, their future." The chamber erupted in shock. Centuries of suspicion were being confirmed. Reed watched as the Bright Ones tried to defend themselves, but the truth field forced them to speak only facts. Their corruption was exposed, their manipulation revealed. With each forced confession, their power visibly crumbled. Other representatives began to speak up, protected by the field. Stories of coercion and threats poured out. The truth, held back for so long, was finally flowing freely. Reed stood steady, watching as the Bright One's carefully constructed system of control collapsed around them. In their arrogance, they had forgotten about this ancient safeguard. In their complacency, they had never imagined anyone would dare use it. But they had never faced a human with nothing to lose and everything to gain. The truth session was far from over, but already Reed could see in the faces around him. Change was coming to the Stellar Council, and it had taken just one human's courage to start it all. Under the truth field's steady influence, the council chamber had transformed. The once orderly rows of representatives were now in constant motion as species after species came forward to speak their truth. "Tell us about the trade restrictions." Reed directed his question to the lead Bright One, whose crystalline form had lost much of its luster. The real reason behind them. Unable to resist the field's power, the Bright One spoke. "We control trade to maintain our position. Advanced technology is restricted. Resources are channeled through our approved routes. We, we ensure no species can grow strong enough to challenge us. A wing glider rose from her seat. My people discovered efficient fusion power 60 cycles ago. Our ships mysteriously malfunctioned after we refused to give the Bright Ones control of the technology. Tell them why. The Bright Ones' form trembled. We sabotaged them, like we sabotaged others. Any species that develops too quickly becomes a threat. The revelations continued. The truth field pulled centuries of deception into the light. Reed presented his evidence methodically, each piece forcing new confessions. These records show over 300 developing worlds currently classified as protected, Reed said, his voice carrying through the chamber. How many of them actually needed protection? None, came the forced answer. They were all advancing too quickly. We couldn't allow. We couldn't risk. A water thinker's voice bubbled up. Our ocean cities were growing. Our ships were reaching new worlds. Then the Bright Ones declared our methods unsafe and restricted our expansion. Was any of it truly unsafe? No. The truth field pulsed. Your methods were efficient, too efficient. You would have surpassed us within a century. The chamber was utterly silent now. Representatives who had feared the Bright Ones for centuries watched as their oppressors were forced to reveal every manipulation, every lie. Reed brought out his final evidence. These are the original Council Charter documents, he said. They speak of unity, of helping younger species grow, of sharing knowledge and resources. When did you decide to abandon these principles? The lead Bright One's crystalline surface cracked slightly under the strain. When we realized we could control instead of share, why help others grow when we could keep them dependent? Why risk our position when we could? When you could turn the entire galaxy into your private collection. Reed finished. Keep every developing species in their place, under your watchful eye. Yes, the word seemed to cause physical pain. Yes, that was our goal. The truth field hummed steadily as more stories emerged. Species after species spoke of blocked progress, of mysterious accidents, of threats and coercion. The Bright Ones were forced to confirm each account. A builder rose, its plant-like form trembling with emotion. All this time, we thought we were alone in our struggles. How many species have died out under your protection? The answer shook the chamber. Dozens of civilizations, stifled and smothered by the Bright One's control, had simply faded away. Reed watched as the truth continued to pour out. The Bright One's crystalline forms had dulled to near opacity, their once brilliant lights dimmed by shame and exposure. But more important than their confessions was the change happening in the chamber. Representatives who had never dared speak to each other were now sharing stories, forming connections. Species that had been kept isolated were discovering common ground. The truth field hadn't just exposed the Bright One's corruption. It had broken down the walls they had built between the galaxy's peoples. As the session continued, Reed could see the future taking shape. The Stellar Council would survive this day, but it would never be the same. And Earth, he knew, would never be caged.